All right, I think we'll get started. Good evening to all of you. I'm very happy to welcome you, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you to this edition of our IMIS SFB lecture. I'm very happy to introduce our dear guests to you. But let me say first that this is a special edition of our lecture series. Tonight's lecture is not on the production of migration, but on the production of knowledge within an SFB, within a collaborative research center. So this is of highest importance to all of us, because we've just started running and developing an SFB just recently, just a year ago. So you will share, our two guests, Ewald Frie and Boris Nieswand, they will share their experiences running an SFB over the whole funding period of 12 years. This has been the SFB 923 Threatened Orders at the University of Tübingen, which was conducted between 2011 until 2023. And we invited these two dear colleagues as soon as we learned about what they produced after the SFB. During the SFB, they produced various outputs, as we all know what is expected from you as running an SFB. But after having closed the SFB work, they decided to sit down and reflect on the past decade, reflect on the research practices within the SFB, the mechanisms, dynamics, and conditions of producing knowledge. And they wrote this wonderful book, Keplerstraße 2, which was published last summer. And as soon as I heard about this, and we heard about this, we decided, well, we've got to talk to you about this book because it's highly instructive and helpful for us. And those of you who have already had the chance to read all through the book, you know how valuable all these insights are for us. The two colleagues who made the effort to come all the way today from remote Tübingen to remote Osnabrück on time, we should praise the German Deutsche Bahn for once. They're Ewald Frie and Boris Nieswand. Ewald Frie was the spokesperson of this Tübingen SFB, at least for the first half of it, of the first 6 years, way into the second funding phase. Ewald Frie is a historian, a professor of modern history at the University of Tübingen since 2008, and his research focuses on modern history, in particular German modern history in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. He also does some research on the Pacific and on Australia, as far as I know, and he's interested in welfare issues and poverty issues and European nobility in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. All this you probably haven't known before, but what you definitely came across is that he's become a very well-known and well-known author. He's a very gifted author. He has produced several bestsellers. His book, The History of the World, was a bestseller, and then there was this book that many of you have read, or some of you have read, as I know, and gave as presents to relatives and so on. It's about the disappearance of rural life in nearby Münsterland, and it's a sort of auto-ethnography when he interviewed his 10 siblings and sisters and brothers. And this book, this special book, was awarded the Deutsche Sachbuchpreis, I think about a year ago, 2 years ago, and ever since you've been traveling a lot and doing readings out of the book and so on. So you've probably come to Osnabrück doing so as well. So it's about the quiet farewell of the rural life in Germany. And Boris Nieswand, I hardly have to introduce to you. He's a dear colleague, a companion of our SFB and the development SFB for a long time. He has developed the preparation of SFB, and he participated in the big conference we had, the inauguration conference in October. And he's a professor of sociology at the University of Tübingen, specializing on diversity and migration. And I think nearly all of you have read his publications on the reflexive turn and reflexivity as a new perspective that we work with and elaborate within migration studies, and that have proven very important for the development of our SFB. So we look forward to learn about the knowledge production that you came to learn and pursue in your SFB. I think what you produce in this book is special in a sense that it reconstructs daily work within the SFB. It is a thick description, it is analysis of these mechanisms and dynamics that you encounter and that SFB lives on and depends on. And what you truly achieve with this book is to produce evidence. When I read all of the chapters, but some passages, I thought, yeah, this is exactly what I experienced already within the first month or the years to prepare the SFB. So it's sort of this experience that you recall and describe very vividly. I very much like the tone of the book, the tone you set, and that takes you through the book. And in a way, I read the book as a piece of love confession to the way we produce knowledge, or the way you produce knowledge in humanities and social sciences. So we're very much looking forward to an interesting talk, a very inspiring talk, I'm sure, about this. And thanks for coming and having you with us. So should pass on the mic.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, then go back to the. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting us. It's the first time, I think, we're in the colloquium in Tübingen. We also presented together. And the short history of this book was that we were in our last retreat in Ellwangen, which is a monastery, and the spokesperson, Mischa Meyer, at this time said, we have still some money for sabbatical semesters. Because there was an original plan to end the SFB with a 4-volume kind of comprehensive analytical encyclopedia or whatever of threatened orders. But these groups were not working. There was Corona, and somehow there was not much energy in these groups, and it became clear they will not produce what they were expected to do. And the third phase of an SFB combined with Corona was a bit difficult in terms of motivation. And then I said, I think it was my question to Ewald. I mean, I also knew that he had to lose some reputation writing with the sociologists. So, so I was not sure whether he wanted. And then I asked him, shall we apply? And then, and then we agreed. And then we had 1 semester of writing. And then it took us a little bit longer. We did 16 interviews, had sources and so on, but more or less we did it in 6 months. The basic of the book was done. So it is relatively quickly written book, but there was 12 years of experiences, and it was also not so easy to find a form of how do you tell a story, a kind of a thick description, a microhistory of such a strange entity as an SFB. And this was what we tried, and I pass over to Ewald to explain some of our methods and the structure of the book.
Okay, so this is the sources we depended on. It's 16 interviews we did with people who were in the SFB from the first phase to the third phase, PhDs, postdocs, professors, and non-academic staff, all that. Then, of course, we had the sources we produced during the 12 years, so it's books, journal articles, but it's administrative things that were collected, emails and all that stuff, papers for what is Vorstand? For
Managing board.
For the managing board and all that stuff. And of course, the problem is that we were part of the SFB we are talking about. So this has its pros and cons. Of course, we have insights that might not be gained from the outside. On the other side, we are part of the project we are talking about. We do not want to lose friends when analyzing the SFB. So some things remain unsaid that might have been said. So, but in the end, we thought it is possible to write the book if we show where we are and from what position we are talking about the SFB, so everybody knows what the limitations and the chances are. So then we decided to structure the book along the way the production of knowledge in an SFB goes. First thing is you come from somewhere, you are in a place, you have limitations and chances that are connected to the way you have, or to the disciplines you have studied and all that stuff, and what your career is. Then people are planning such a project. Then they are presenting it to the referees who come and decide whether you get the money or not. And then once you get the money, for Osnabrück, as far as I got it, it's April 24, right? In Tübingen, it was July 2011. Then you have to start. And it's kind of an adventure because nobody knows how it's going to work. I mean, we all know in general how it works, but then those who are in the managing board, they see there are problems they didn't dream of that have to be solved now. And most of the PhD students have not worked in a scientific setting before, so they experience ways of doing research they didn't know before. All that stuff starts. While working, and in the end of the first phase, your work gets evaluated. And there are a lot of things connected to this. What does evaluation in the humanities mean? Who is evaluated in what way, what are the criteria, and so on. That's what we describe in the fifth chapter. The sixth is about completing. That means what do you achieve in the end of the SFB? What is a good SFB after 12 years? So it's about publications, but about other things, about talking to a wider audience as well. And what do we think is our criteria for a good SFB or not? And 7, of course, is the summary of what we achieved, and it's connected to a story that we can tell about the last people who got the money from the SFB, where they were, what they did, and we connect this to a kind of summary of our book. And now it's you again.
It's me again?
Yeah. Science and technology studies, that's all a sociologist.
Okay, I mean, what the book is, I mean, it is, as those who have read it might have noticed, it is published with Beck, which is a publisher that addresses a larger audience, and probably we got it published because of some of Ewald's merits, because for them it was the question, is the market big enough for what was called Publikumsverlag in Germany. However, intellectually, our background is in this. The book is contextualized in the science and technology studies. As you know, since the 80s, there was this turn towards from philosophical ideas about how academic work functions to an empirical research and to a praxeological turn. How do academic scientists work? And at the beginning, it was especially the natural science engineers that were in the focus, but in the last 10-15 years you can see that there is an increased focus on the humanities and the social sciences, in which are also these practices which were for a long time also not considered worth of empirical research became now into the focus. And in this context also our study is a kind of thick description, perhaps some kind of ethnography, or if you are talking from the perspective of history, it's a micro-historic study, which is highly contemporary. And as the historians, I don't know whether it would be perceived as historical studies by historians, but Ewald might answer this question because it might be too recent, and the kind of relying on interviews might be also not the standard way of how historians work, as you know. Yeah. And this is also the fear that you should not talk about living beings because you're biased. This is what historians fear a lot, much more than social scientists. However, and when it connects to certain topics which are probably not explored in depth as it could be, but it is the history of the university is touched on. It is what could be called humanities and social science studies. As a larger umbrella under which this study is placed. There is a lot of focus about new public management and its effect on university organization and the organization of research. We have we talk about precarization of employment within the academic system. There is some sociology of evaluation, ethnography of academic work, the question of professionalization, and the question of interdisciplinarity as a practice. I think all these topics are touched on, but as I said, not probably in the academic depths you could touch on them.
Okay, the first chapter is called Experiencing, and it starts with Boris and me riding a bike, and not especially this one. It's two bikes, and we are riding through Tübingen because what we want to show is that in the history of the city, I mean, this probably only works for Tübingen, Marburg, and Greifswald. But by riding a bike through the city, you experience not only a history of a city, but a history of a university as well. You see the buildings from the 16th century, then the new university in the 1830s, or 1840s, 1850s, and then the university buildings of around 1880 to 1900, and then the new buildings of the 1960s, 70s. And we end up in the building we were in, Keplerstraße 2. And what we wanted to show in this kind of a bit strange way is that the history we are working on, the history of the last 20 years, is connected to a longer university history and is part of it. It's not that everything starts in the 2000s. It's part of a longer history. And many people who are in the story have this longer history in mind, partly they will. And then it starts with a description of the building we were in and how does a building influence those who are in and the other way around. And then we shortly talk about the SFB as the history of SFBs. The SFB starts in the 1960s. And the first idea was to do it from top down. So the Wissenschaftsrat identified fields where German science and humanities were strong, and they wanted to put the money in there. So they produced these Sonderforschungsbereiche, which is not collaborative as the English translation later was, but it's kind of research where it already is strong. And then they would talk to university people saying, well, we want to give you the money. Could you please write an application? What they did, and then they got the money. And in the beginning, there was no limit in temporary terms. So the funding was for a longer period of time, whatever. And people, and then evaluators would come and would try to find out whether those guys were still working and what they had achieved, but there were no regulatory terms when you had to reapply. And this goes up to the 1980s, and then there is a reform because those who were strong in research in the end of the 60s now were partly, they were retiring, new people were coming in, and they thought there should be a shift. And then the idea was to turn this upside down and to say we are starting from the bottom. So not the Wissenschaftsrat decides what the best place is for the humanities, or for themes in the humanities and social sciences and medicine and life sciences and so on are, but people should apply themselves. And then referees would find out. And that's in the 80s. Then you get SFBs that have more specific titles. You know, these SFBs of the end of the 60s, they were called Medieval Times or The Heart or something like this, you know. And then in the 80s, you get the German the bourgeoisie, Bielefeld, or more specific fields in the life sciences, whatever. And then you get more restructuring, and in the 2000s, the idea of new public management coming through. Then you have the Excellence Initiative 2006 to 2007 going through Germany. And the specificity of Tübingen is that it loses in the first round, 2006, and it's a catastrophe for Tübingen. The academic talk, I came to Tübingen in 2008. The academic talk was Tübingen is going down. It's the end of the story of this wonderful university. You know, Freiburg and Heidelberg will take all the money, and we are second class, and this is all a catastrophe. And then people who were then, like me, younger generation, you might not imagine that it's true, but it was, who were then in their 40s and relatively new to the university, kind of embraced this new public management idea. Not in words, we were saying, of course, we're against that, but in fact, by saying we will try to get these bigger third-party funded institutions to Tübingen. And then in 4 or 5 years, there were 4 SFBs in the or three SFBs in the humanities, and these younger people tried now to bring, as they thought, Tübingen back to the first class universities in Germany, and then when the second Excellence Initiative ran, then Tübingen got the title, and it still has it. So the story up to now is better than it was in the 2000s. So we're talking about that, trying to get the background for our application for the SFB. And then we have a shorter part where we are thinking about, well, what is the background of this story? So how did university change in the last 20, 30 years? And these are the 4 points here, that the university, if you look from the 60s to now, universities have become more, they have become bigger, the students are, the number of students has increased, the number of staff has increased, university has become not something, a reserve for bourgeois men, but it's something like an environment for professional work, right? It's no longer this esoteric place somewhere. It's somewhere else. Money, third-party funding gets more and more important, and the renommee of professors is more and more connected to the third-party funding they get. Structures means the most important thing might be digitalization and the way it restructures university. And in the 2000s, maybe the most important thing was that we learned what other people were doing. You could observe how other PhD students did their work, how many postdocs could see what did other people publish and so on. There was more openness in this kind of hierarchy and this kind of concurrence that is there between people. Okay, this is experiencing, and then the next chapter is planning.
Yeah, planning. This is one of the results of our research was that people use different starting points from when they tell their stories. And so that the first PhD students start in 2011, 1st of July, right, was the first day. But there are also prehistories of these SFB and the failed attempts and a career of a catchword like the threatened orders, bedrohte Ordnung. This might also, this prehistory of this catchword might be also interesting of how, on the one hand, SFBs rely on having something like a catchword, which somehow creates theoretical association, which connects them to a broader public, which creates interests and fits in a certain time slots, promises something to be sexy for an academic audience, but also beyond. The catchword threatened orders comes from, which I didn't know actually. I learned very late, I think a little bit before the book, but I was not aware that this this word comes from, or these two words, this combination from Anselm Döring-Manteuffel, some of the historians might know him. And it was in the early 2000s, and he was thinking about after the boom, which is that in the 70s, the hypothesis, if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a kind of an it's a caesura in the 1970s from the post-war growth period to the 1970s, more somehow skeptical of modernization theories, of growth, of having also a different view, perspective on globality and so on. And he somehow had perhaps in kind of Koselleck phase in his life. You know, Koselleck had this theory of temporality, at least was one of these things which he became famous. And there is this idea that you have temporal arcs, large-scale formations of temporal order, which you can describe and which structure society for some time, and then they become replaced by something else. And his idea was probably inspired by this after the boom, this idea that they were in the early 2000s in a phase in which people started feeling uncomfortable in their time. And that there was indicators that we are ahead of a significant temporal shift. And this was what this idea of threatened orders was supposed to express. And then there were at this point there were small faculties. Now we have big faculties, and this small faculty was history and philosophy. And they were thinking about a graduate school. And he said, let's call it threatened orders. But I think this graduate school did not work out. But the word was there. And then when in the early 2000s, I think from 2004 to 2008, a couple of new professors, a new generation was formed in Tübingen of historians. And the historians had one SFB, Kriegserfahrungen, experiences of war before. and they wanted this younger generation started to, as Ewald already said, to somehow connect to this new management, neoliberal turn in the management of the university, and wanted to make an SFB. They inherited this word. And then what happened is also that, at least what how Ewald taught me this story, you just interrupt me if I'm telling, if this is not correct, that he inherited, that there were already projects when he started. There was not a spokesperson, but there were projects and there was a name. And Ewald had the task to make a story out of it. How to connect, so all these things, and this is what he did, and somehow this is how the first proposal was somehow created. However, what happened in between was that this idea of large-scale order was not attractive to this younger generation anymore, and one reason was because they were more skeptical of these macroscopical ideas of order, in which it was in the older generation, which was much more comfortable with that. And they were much more into microhistory, and there was also, especially in the ancient epochs, Middle Ages and the late antiquity, they had a project in which they tried to renegotiate these borders of the epochs. And they thought how epochs are constructed in history is somehow limiting, and we need somehow to remake them. And so what happened is that there was a shift from these big order ideas to microhistories, and there was a shift from Ordnung to Bedrohung. And beside the theoretical movements in this group, there was this idea that it was much easier to tell stories about Bedrohung than about Ordnung, threat. So there were avalanches and riots and sandstorms and things that were promised to be interesting, exciting, action, and so on. And so there was a shift from order to threat, from large history to microhistory, in this idea of the planning, which structured then the first proposal. And then I will skip some of the details, not to get too deeply in that. So what happened then? They had 4 fields. This SFB, you know, they need somehow some kind of grouping the projects in a way, and there were 4. They took the number of 4, and it was a 4-square scheme. And they said there's, on the one hand, threat is defined by the constitution, how it's constituted. Either it is evident, like an avalanche, or it has to be constructed. There needs to be construction efforts to make people aware of a threat or to instrumentalize a threat. Like, I mean, in the case of migration, or you could also take the climate change, which is also requires more constructive work to convince people than an avalanche. And the second point was whether the second dimension was whether the threat was coming from inside or outside. So this might not be very important for you, but the interesting thing is when it got funded, the SFB in 2000, I mean, in 2009, I think these efforts condensed. In 2010, there was a proposal. 2011, it was granted that when I came in 2013 to the first retreat, there was this idea that the whole model doesn't work, and that they should have a new one. And there was a critique. I think it was a little bit. There was a critique that this inside-outside distinction does not work, especially from environmental historians. Didn't like that. And then that also this constructed and real, which was not the wording, but somehow it resonated with this distinction of real threats and constructed threat, also didn't work. So and then there was the idea, let's do something new. And this is the exciting story about the SFB, that we in the second phase somehow got rid of our organizing model. and invented a new one, which is this one there. And if you want to talk later about it, I can also explain. There was a heavy discussions about the social scientists, the sociology, political science, EKW, empirische Kulturwissenschaften, which is European ethnology in Tübingen. This was our suggestion. But we had this idea that there should be a typology before to have more systematic outputs, and then there was a big discussion about whether historians can work with typologies or not, and whether they can do systematic theory or not, and what it means. And at the end, this kind of the typology disappeared. We called it the program. We called it the washing machine because it was turning, and there was a program of the washing machine, a control panel, which was this typology, which was, I think, power and exchange and meaning however, there was a Weberian, basically a Weberian typology in front of it, and this we lost in the discussion with the people from history and literature study, and there's a really interesting exchange of emails which Ewald has, in which all these arguments as why typologies make sense or no sense, or whether SFB should produce theoretically systematic results or not. With this model we went into the second phase, and it created an interesting dynamic in this SFB. Most of the people, the starting point when these young professors met, people said there was a lot of emotional energy, it was fun, people enjoyed it, being part of the group. And then also in this time, people said this was really great when we were discussing, and it was we skipped our model, and it was highly risky, and everybody was aware, and we knew if we are not finding solutions, we will fail. It's created a lot of collective energy and also joy of discussing with colleagues. And many of our interviewers said this was the best time because it was really input was needed. Many people were needed, and there was a high emotional energy. So then in the second phase, after the second phase, it was very, this was the evaluators on the on-site evaluation evaluated us very good, but the Senat of the DFG said, I think it was they haven't seen something like that before. Perhaps they have seen before, but at least it was how some people told us. Because we needed also a new architecture. We had not A, B, C, D, 4 fields, but we had E, F, G. So it was really a new SFB, and many projects had to change. And so the Senat, people in the Senat asked, this long-term research, is this kind of a serious enterprise? And our argument was, if academic work is open to results and theorization, it must be possible that you find new theoretical concepts. Ewald told me in the train before that he was once in the SFB, where they had a theoretical framework in which people did not believe anymore. And the spokesperson said, but we have to stick it because we wrote it in the first proposal. And he thought always this was a wrong decision. It should be able, if there is theoretical progress, it has to be in the proposal. And but we also talked with some of the more senior people, and they said, I think they said, okay, this was too risky. You should not have done it. But it's a very interesting point about this SFB. I think you take over.
Okay. Just the interesting thing is the microphone. Oh. And the interesting thing, in my view, is that research in large projects has to be planned for 12 years. But research must be open. it must be open to new results, new ideas. And do these huge structures allow for redimensioning, restructuring during the time it works? Or it is what I said. Even before we started, I wrote a paper, and I came across it when I went through this again, because I had not been so long in Tübingen before, and the first thing I saw was this strange, what is Müllsack in English? Does anybody knows that?
Yeah, I wrote it somewhere.
Bin bag, yeah, there is a bin bag in Tübingen that deconstructs itself after 5 or 6 days. So you can put your rubbish in it, the biological rubbish, and it disappears after a time. I said, this is what we are going to do in the first phase. You know, you have to imagine a structure like this bin bag. And after 4 years, it's gone, and we have to find a new one. Let's get started. And but the interesting, generally speaking, the interesting thing is, how do you plan when you try to be open for new results, for surprise? How does that work? Okay.
May I just one point to add. What was interesting, there were 2 postdocs we interviewed, and they remembered the first retreat after this big reform. And we went through and we got the money, and they said, and then they had new ideas of how to redevelop this model, this washing machine. And I remember I was one of them, but there were also some others who were part of the reform team. Were very much pro-reform of the model, and we became immediately conservatives because everybody said, no, we don't do that again. And this is the question, and they said they found it particularly frustrating that they felt this model is not open to criticism and reform anymore. And I think a lot of this emotional energy created in this first phase was that this promise, you can participate and it has an effect, was somehow credible. And when at the point when there was the people started not being credible on this issue anymore, people felt disappointed and also retreated from the SFB because they felt that their intellectual energy is not wanted also.
Yeah, but this is your chapter. You have to come back again.
Okay. I think we have to look a little bit.
We have to slow.
Slow, yeah. I mean, this chapter is very much a thick description of how the presentation process works, from the proposal to the Begehung, the on-site evaluation or review, and for those who are interested, probably you can have a look at it, and I will not go into the details. I think what is interesting about this situation is that normally the standard of academic review is double-blind review, right, for journal articles, and this has the assumption that the social relationship between the reviewer and the reviewed should not matter in terms of evaluation. This is at least the theory about it. We know all the limits of this theory, but in this case we have an evaluation in which people meet, and meet people in the evaluation process, and also people meet who know each other for quite some time. I mean, I was, as you might know, in the evaluation team of this SFB. And the question is how these kind of face-to-face interactions affect the review process. And this is one of the questions which which we tried to somehow to explore and to highlight. And also what might be also interesting is that we interviewed one of our reviewers who was twice there in the review process, and he said, and he was a very experienced person, and he said everybody of the reviewers is scared to do something wrong and to be embarrassed, because I mean, as the person you reviewed, you think these are the evil guys, and they come here there and they want to destroy, could destroy anything. Perhaps they don't, but perhaps they. But on the other hand, you have a group that meets the first time on this occasion, which is highly diverse in terms of disciplinary backgrounds and so on, and meets a team that is highly prepared, very focused, and very determined to get this funding. And this kind of, I think this constellation also somehow explains, which did not happen in your case, but why it becomes sometimes confrontative, because why there is a lot of anxiety, and anxiety can switch easily in aggression. But these atmospheric changes, when it becomes tense and have a diagnostic function for whether this group now deserves funding or not. And criticism becomes some kind of a diagnostic tool. So normally things are not clarified in this kind of evaluation. People don't discuss for hours and about axiomatic assumptions and don't know methods also. But it's normally one question, one answer, the evaluators collect material for evaluation. And the atmosphere is a very important aspect of it. And I think there is also one study in which shows that I think by tendency the evaluation of the evaluators gets better during the on-site review, which makes also some sense because face-to-face interaction has kind of some moral implications. And so we have to keep our faces. And obviously this normally produces better evaluations of the application than the reviewers have before or after the on-site review. But it has also this potential of confrontational tensions that are kind of also a little bit anxiety-driven and can escalate. And then also what might be somehow interesting is this life after the Begehung. There is, at least in our case, we lost projects during the on-site reviews. And normally this project in this neoliberal idea of funding, there is a kind of the winners, those who get the funding, have to demonstrate some ironic distance to all these procedures, to say that, oh, there's a lot of luck, and not to attribute the successes too much to their own personality. Would be bad style. But for the people who lose, at least in our case, they silently disappeared and came never back. So there was the spokespersons, they called them when we got the results and said, okay, sorry, your project was not funded. And then they never showed up again. And this kind of, the question of this management of these losers of this competition is also, I think, an under-reflected aspect of this restructuring of the academic the reorganization of the academic funding landscape. And then also the remembering and telling, this is a lot about these stories. These Begehungen have a little, have in our case, this capacity of creating legends, on creating some mythic figures of the evil reviewer and some of the absurdity about the whole procedure of evaluation and the force of solidarity and team play and so on. And this might be also interesting to have a look on your own group. What are the mythical narratives that are created, and what is this kind of this group spirit that is created by that? And I think also one important thing, which is also one of probably the big resources of an SFB, is that academics are normally not used to play, at least in the social sciences and in the humanities, to play in teams. They are individual players. But the SFB wins or loses as a team. And this kind of collective energy is also, I think, one of these big resources of the group.
Okay, then the next thing is, where's my second? I said I am organized. In fact, I'm not. The chapter about working tells the story of people getting into the SFB, PhDs learning what it means to be a researcher. You know, the historians going to the archives, the sociologists and ethnologists doing field work, other people experiencing new ways of working somewhere else. They begin to learn that they are no longer students, so kind of all-around people, but they are contemporary historians. At least people say they are, because they are in a project of contemporary history. So they get used to being a researcher in contemporary history. Now, how does this work? How does this new way of experiencing myself, how does that work? There are different styles of work, of course, and you can describe this. What do PhDs do? What do they experience? What an SFB is all about. And project managers, PIs, have very different experiences. Their work style is different. They work, you know, for a few months, they do work for the SFB. That is when the application has to be written. And then they, of course, they do team organization and things like that, but the work is done by the PhD students and postdocs, mostly. And then they come back during the retreats and during in-between organizational meetings, but they restart doing work on content seriously when the next application has to be written. So, and they believe the SFB is writing an application and then managing the team, whereas the PhDs and postdocs think an SFB is about, you know, going to the archive, doing your thing, and get something ready in 4 years. And then there's the administrative stuff. We called it the Maschinenraum in our SFB, the engine room, where we had people coming from very diverse non-academic backgrounds, and seeing this is my chance to become part of a strange group of scientists and do my thing. So the secretaries we had, the manager of the SFB, they were not really people with an academic background, but people who were fascinated by this kind of work. And we were lucky to have these guys. And then you see that, you know, wedding cards and holiday postcards, they were put where this office was of the secretary. That was kind of the social hub where people would go, saying they were treated badly, they want to have a new room, something else. So, and that shows you that academic work has a lot to do with with socializing, with feeling well, and this has its place somewhere that, and this is, or let's say, this is an important place that is not in the application, that is not funded, but somewhere this social heart of a bigger structure of research, somewhere you will find it. In our part, it was in this engine room.
And I mean, there where we had in almost all interviews, people felt the urge to pronounce how important this group of people were in the engine room as a kind of social place where you could go and talk and also complain and so on. It was really made highly relevant by our interview research. I mean, this one was one of the most clear results, I would say,
yeah.
Right?
And it's surprising results for me. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is that I didn't perceive it being for a time head of the SFB and the rest of the time PI. I was not really that involved in the social life of the SFB as PhDs and postdocs are. And in the end, our interviewees told us stories of 3 different SFBs. You know, the SFBs of the PhD and postdocs is a very different SFB from the PI's SFB, and it's very different from the the Maschinenraum SFB. And this is interesting, and it's, I think it's interesting to reflect on this, that you have these different observations or perceiving of the work we are doing. And this means criteria for success are highly different if you ask these different groups, because they have different ideas of what it means to be successful in this group or in science. Right. That's the next chapter is for you. You can do without.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay, I mean the question of evaluating is basically trying to show one of the major dilemmas of an SFB, and on the one hand it shall be a group that cooperates and in which creates is, I mean, I read a little bit too much Randall Collins, so I'm talking always about, too often about emotional energies. But one of the emotional energies of such a group is the emotional energies around cooperation, of being a group, of having joint efforts, of having synergies. But on the other hand, it is also a group that is somehow that runs on competition, on being better than others, of making a career, which is necessary to make a career in academia. And it shall be both. The SFB shall be internationally competitive, it shall be a kind of a Leuchtturm, kind of represent German academia in the world. It shall bring out excellent researchers, professors, and so on. And on the other hand, it shall be a group that has some cohesion, which somehow is acts responsible to people with different backgrounds and so on. And these two principles somehow they interact and become configured in different ways. And one of which is of how our SFB dealt with it. I mean, we had a very large span of disciplines, as also you have. And one, I mean, like people who do literature study of the Middle Age have very different forms of evaluating their work than political scientists have. I only learned when we were writing this book that historians measure their success in numbers of reviews books get. I was really not aware. I would look at Google Scholar and look if I want to have how important this person is. But Google Scholar does not work. I mean, the historians among you might know, it does not work for how historians work. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think perhaps it has something to do with footnotes, or that they have these kind of preference for the narrative texts and do not quote so much as social scientists would do. But nevertheless, if you compare some of our colleagues in history, they are highly renowned people in the field of history, but if you look to their Google Scholars account, then you think what is, they often they don't have, and if they have, you think what happened? How do you explain these gaps that you find postdocs in the social science who have much more quotation? However, different, and then is also the question of how you evaluate books and what is how much generalization is necessary. So, and what we did basically. And I think this was at least a little bit by also Ewald's style of being the manager, is to keep it more or less out of the group, unless when we were facing the next evaluation and had to play the application. Then the pressure becomes very high to finish dissertations. Having not enough dissertations is a reason why SFBs are not funded in the second phase. And this kind of having a kind of a relatively cooperative, I mean, of course, hierarchical, but at least in our, also the postdocs and the doctoral students said that these retreats were interesting and they felt taken seriously, and that they said, of course, there were hierarchies, but there was also a lot of open discussion. So people liked our retreats normally because they seemed not to be so hierarchical as one could assume. But nevertheless, at the point when it went to the next evaluation, the pressure was very high on the PhD students. because everybody knew our success will depend on this thesis. And what I learned is always good to have ancient historians in the team because they finish normally in time. And ethnographers don't do. However, and then we had one also, we had a kind of an incentive that those who get ready in time, they got 6 months of extra funding by the rector of the university. And those people who did not get ready in time, they had an uncompleted PhD and did not get 6 months funding, except there were some, I don't know, family issues or sickness cases in which legitimize that. And some also that was obviously also not, people did not like this kind of hierarchization of PhD students. It also left some scars on the souls of PhD students. And when we come to the evaluation, Ewald said the evaluation criteria are very different, and also the groups have different PhDs. Then I think also one of our findings was that the natives of the, if you will call this this old ethnological colonial term probably, but of the SFB are the doctoral students, because they get academically socialized in a cohort, and it is normally their first academic socialization at all. So they feel that their academic identity is very much is shaped by these experiences they make, and they considered them not all, but more or less as a collective. They went as a cohort through this process. While the postdocs, I put also the Ich bin Hanna, they were aware first you don't make a career within SFB because there are so many people working on the same concept. I have to distinguish myself from the intellectual agenda of the SFB in order to get a PhD, and I have not to be interdisciplinary. At least in history, I mean, it's difficult if you're made your PhD in ancient history to make an habilitation in early modern history and get a professorship. So shifting epochs is already a problem. But if you're too interdisciplinary in your publications, it might change. I mean, we are also a little bit of history now, but there is a strong pressure of disciplinarization and also investing your energies on things that help you to get a professorship. And then it's often not realistic to finish a habilitation in 4 years if people are aiming at it. So the SFB is always a stepping stone in between for them. And it's not the time in which they complete a PhD also. So the PhD students, the postdocs, which we consider were somehow the soil and the columns on which the SFB is built, were not the columns, but there was a highest fluctuation and also the highest skepticism in the interviews of the use of such a group. And the PIs, they are on the one hand, they are the ones that plan. They are the professors, not only, but the majority of our professors. So they have the longest continuity. But they create a problem because they remember we had this discussion 3 times, and I don't want to have them the 4th time if you have in the phase of 12 times. So they disappoint people. They lose their emotional energy to participate. You lose people during these 12 years, and they normally don't come back. So people who lost the kind of the intellectual touch to the group, I mean, they still made their project proposals, but the group of those who were somehow committed to the SFB, I mean, we had also the problem of Corona, which was really, which did a lot of damage to the group, but they are. There's a high probability of losing their emotional energy and their commitment during these 12 years. So this is this, and the evaluation, very short, the doctoral students, the German system, if you, I mean, when I started to reflect when we were writing this text on this German system of evaluation, you cannot explain anybody anymore that you have, that the head of a project who wrote the proposal is the supervisor and examines the PhD. I mean, by which theory of evaluation this makes sense? I mean, it is, and I mean, these conflicts of interest. I mean, and also, how do you evaluate if the PhD student goes too far from the project proposal, and so on, or somehow thinks that the concepts the professor set in the proposal are not don't make sense, and whatever. There are a lot of problems, but in our case, there was not much protest. And what I say, why this system works is the big magna cum laude. There were some professors who gave generally summa cum laude to all their PhD students, because they must be excellent because they were their PhD students. And they were institutionally powerful enough to do that. And secondly, the others were normally, when they did their job, they became a magna cum laude, and nobody could complain about that. This is, I think, a little bit ironic, a bit polemic, but I think how this very strange system works. And the postdocs, they are much more connected. I mean, the habilitation is also there, but the question, the market becomes much more important. How they can get position themselves on a market for professorships, and this is also the criteria of evaluation. They have whether the habilitation makes some sense, and also in the networks, which were more important before, seem to be less important. There's one, Ewald quoted one of these studies in which in the 1990s some historians could rely on the networks of their professor. They hoped to become professor because their professor was famous. And this was enough, not completely enough, but this seemed not to work in the 2000s anymore, and today anymore. So you have to perform, and then you have a lot of this kind of CVs exploded, and you have to be good, excellent in all kinds aspects of your life, which is also the professionalization process, and that we have more and more criteria in which we measure academic performance, explosion of CVs, and I now turn to you.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time. Mm-hmm. Completing, I can do this very shortly. This is the question about what do SFBs achieve? I mean, there is Jörg Barbarowski, 2013, who said SFBs are job machines and they are publication machines, but they produce heaps of books, but they prevent PhDs from doing scientific work. And we discussed this in this chapter by showing what PhDs and postdocs do, how they work with the concepts the SFB has, and we have five types of people. So there are the users. So those who simply take the things that the SFB offers and do it. There are the optimizers who try to make this better and achieve some theoretical theoretical ideas that come from the SFB and optimize them. There are the players, those who who work with these things they get and produce something more or less new with it. There are the travelers, those who take the concept somewhere else where it has never been tried and try to connect diverse fields by these theoretical frameworks. And there are those who fail in a way because the idea the professor had in the beginning does not work, and they have to find something new and have to negotiate this with their professor. All these things are there. And what do the PhDs do? They produce, of course, books and journal and thematic issues of journals. And the question whether they achieve more than they had achieved, than they would have achieved when there would have been no SFB at all, is of course difficult to answer this question. We would say that in the end, most of us have kept writing journal articles and books And some of us have won awards, so there must be some esteem for the work we have done, even if we worked in the SFB for quite some time. I think that's enough for the moment, otherwise we are totally running out of time.
Yeah.
So summarizing.
Okay, the last, only to the last anecdote, we in December 2023, there were the last people who were, because of parental leave and some other reasons, still had a contract in the SFB. And we went to, we lost the building, and they got a kind of a shared office space. When we came, there were monitors missing because people told us that the rectorate had said people who work in the university could take their screens with them. We don't know whether that's true, but there were a lot of screens missing, not there. And then there was no secretary anymore. There was no managing director anymore. There were only PhD students and one postdoc, and they had a kind of like a shared flat community. Ironic pragmatists, I think this is an expression of Ewald. And then we were sitting there with them and talking a little bit. Then there was now I have to look it up. It's an excavator, a demolition excavator, an Abrissbagger, was demolishing a building in the valley we were looking on, and this was the first building of the SFB in which we were in the first time. But nobody knew except Ewald and me, because the memory of the SFB is very short. But what is interesting about this story is the short memory, but it is also the vitality of this group, that it existed. The last person standing were PhD students and a postdoc finishing their qualification work, which was obviously one of the vital driving forces of this SFB. And this is here you see, these are the postcards and baby photos which were at this machine room hanging, and this is how they ended in a cellar shelf, and we don't know what happened with them. And at the 31st December of 23 was the last day they could use the room, because they had a programmed key, and after the 31st January they could not open the doors anymore. So this was a formal end, I would say, of the SFB 923, and now I stop.